very talented wheat specialist with K-State with us today, and just going to go over a quick market update and then have a variety discussion later on. Just wanted to go over what we have in the plot with you, and also make it available for anybody that wants to go out and look at it later on. A big shout out and special thank you to Conrady Seed Cleaning. They are the ones taking care of the plot and where it is located. They do a great job with us every year, and we just appreciate everything they do. It was a little wet, and so it did get planted in late October. And so far, everything is looking really great out there. We have some color starting to come out, and just looking forward to a great harvest if Mother Nature would really cooperate this year. I know that some fields around here in Kingman County have also had a cheat problem, but just working on weaning that out. But other than that, we are looking really good in Kingman County. So if we are ready for the market update, I will hand that over for the specialist, and we can start with that.
Yeah, sure thing. So I'm Romulo Lolato, Extension Wheat and Forage Specialist with Kansas State University, based out of Manhattan. And together here with me, we also have Kelsey Anderson, who is the new Extension Wheat Pathologist here based out of Manhattan, and Eric DeWolf, who is the former Extension Pathologist and now is more on a research and teaching role within K-State. So I guess before we jump in the varieties there, a brief overview of the wheat conditions around the state. So as Kelly mentioned, Kingman apparently had a very good initial conditions with moisture and everything, and the crop is looking very good there, as she mentioned. And that's true for that entire south central portion of Kansas, really. So probably from that McPherson County west to probably Barton County and south down to Sumner, from Sumner to about Meade or so, a pretty large swath of the state there, where the crop is actually in very good conditions. It had enough moisture in the fall, very good development there, and good yielding conditions as well. Although that's the part of the state where we started seeing some strap rust a while back. It's probably Kelsey and Eric are going to give an update here in a little bit. Other parts of the state were not so lucky, right? And so we get the far southwest Kansas. Well, things were pretty dry out there, and since last fall. So the crop many times was planted on time, but it never really emerged during the fall. It never really emerged until late January, early February, when we had some decent moisture coming in. In north central Kansas, it was also very dry, but not in the fall. It was more of a spring drought that we had in north central Kansas. But that region is also considerably behind their normal for precipitation for the growing season as well, at least until late part of May there. So drought stress on those two big wheat growing regions around Kansas. And another important issue that we have this year was the freeze damage. So we had two freeze events, one April 3rd and one on April 13th through the 17th, which actually damaged a considerable area of wheat around the state. At one point in time, we were estimating that up to 40 or 50% of the primary tillers were lost in some of these areas. But again, if there was enough moisture, then the crop was able to recover. And that was the case, for example, for Barton County, Ellsworth County, that region. They received some moisture and the crop was able to recover. As we move north from there, so Republic County, that was also kind of the case. But as we go west, like Phillipsburg and that area, the crop went through a pretty severe combination of freeze and drought stress there. And interesting that freeze damage, we usually see a greater amount of injury in a crop that is further along, right, in the development, just because it's more sensitive. However, this year it was kind of the other way around. Fields that were planted earlier and had a nicer, lusher canopy, they lost a few tillers. They may have lost those 20, 30, 40% of the primary tillers, but they still have enough tillers there to compensate. Meanwhile, the small crop, where we usually say that for being behind in development can take those temperatures better, that's the one that actually suffered quite a bit this year, because it was cold enough that many times we lost up to 2 out of 4 tillers, for example, and they really kind of damaged the crop, especially in combination with dry conditions. So that's an update there of conditions throughout the states. Sowing, I didn't talk much about disease because I believe Eric and Kelsey, you guys would give a brief update on that as well.
Yeah, so, oh, Eric, do you want to kick it off, or do you want me
Well,
to?
you go ahead. Yeah.
Sure. So I think the biggest disease story we've had this year has been striped rust. So just in terms of the number of fields that have been affected, not necessarily in terms of yield loss. So we started to see striped rust in South and South Central Kansas a little later than last year, so maybe at the end of April. And it showed up in Kingman County on the upper canopy in mid-May. So we started to get worried there. And since then, we've had reports up through northwestern Kansas and down, especially in south central Kansas. So we've been a little bit concerned. We think the warm weather has slowed that down a little bit. But one of the interesting things about striped rust this year is that, similar to last year, we feel like we're experiencing a race shift. So some of the varieties that have historically been resistant to striped rust, we've started to see more symptoms than we would like. So that's something, as we talk about some of these varieties that we might mention. In terms of other diseases, we've seen leaf rust pop up a little bit here later in the season, which makes sense because it gets a little warmer. So that's been a bit more sporadic than the striped rust reports, but we have been hearing of some isolated incidences. And then in central Kansas, we've had a good amount of reports of septoria and tan spot. So some of that initial septoria we think got knocked back by that freeze event. So some of those early first leaves that had an early septoria infection had been, knocked back a little bit by that freeze event, and then weren't available to affect the upper canopy. So that might have been one favorable outcome of the freeze, although the yield dock was pretty big there in some areas. One thing that we have been pretty concerned about these last couple of weeks is the risk for Fusarium head blight. So Fusarium head blight, just as a quick reminder, is a fungus that only affects wheat during that flowering period, and it's particularly bad if you've had a history of Fusarium head blight in a field, or if you've planted wheat into corn stubble, because this pathogen can survive on corn. It can also survive on soybeans. So that's a big concern for Fusarium head blight, and it really enjoys rainfall periods during that week or so prior to that flowering window. So we've been hearing some reports of Fusarium head blight in southeastern Kansas, and we've been continuing to watch for that and scout for that. Eric, did I leave anything out there? I think those are some of the bigger highlights around the state.
Yeah, I think your comments were spot on there. And as we go through the varieties, Kelsey or I will try and highlight some of these changes that we're seeing in the striped rust populations in recent years. Historically, we've gone through multiple changes of our striped rust population, and it looks like we're in the middle of that once again. So things are changing. Take the time to listen and visit your local variety performance test and demonstration plots. That's a source of great information for you to get some firsthand experience. And then also, just as the wheat is being harvested around the state, we will often put out a publication called Wheat Variety Disease and Insect Ratings, and that's a good place to get the latest summaries of not only disease and insect information, but OMLO has also been putting in a lot of great information on agronomic characteristics in recent years also.
I should mention that we've had some slightly elevated reports of loose smut around the state. So that's just something to keep an eye out for. It's kind of a nuisance problem, and it can be easily taken care of by buying seed, again, so not saving seed, and also through seed treatment. So that's just something that we've had a few extra reports of this year. So it's good to scout and think about some decisions for next year about managing loose smut in the field. So I think that's what we've got. We might as well move on to the variety discussion.
Okay, I'll go ahead and go to our first variety that we have planted, which is Showdown.
Sorry, I was muted there. Okay, well, so Showdown, this is a relatively new variety out of the Oklahoma State breeding program. The OSU breeder is putting this one as probably one of the most widely adapted varieties up north, right? So he expects it to move quite well actually into Kansas. So I guess we need to really take a closer look at this one. Maturity wise, it's going to be a medium to medium late maturing variety. Background here, pedigree has OK rising background across with some AgriPro experimentals there. Some of the pros on this one, it does have a good hash and fly tolerance. Again, that wider adaptability up to northern environments there. Pretty decent acid soil tolerance on Showdown here as well. Now, if you're grazing, it doesn't really put as much forage as some of the other OSU varieties that we are used to. So that's not necessarily a grazing type of variety, and it is relatively tall, and so sometimes it can lean on you there, so might just be on the watch out for that. Kelsey, what do we know on disease reaction here on Showdown? Do we have much information?
Yeah, so like you're saying, it's a newer variety, so we like to get a number of looks at them around Kansas, so it will still be getting some more information on this variety. A couple quick things. So it's advertised as being very good in terms of stripe rust resistance. So that is very promising, and we're seeing some of that in the USDA screening trials that we have around this area, where these varieties are kind of tested really hard against some of the local stripe rust populations there. So that's been performing pretty well, and it's supposed to be fairly resistant to these Septoria leaf spot complexes. So if this might be a good option for a low management situation, you know, maybe you can have some of that resistance in your genetics and then consider not applying a fungicide or scouting a little bit less. This might be a good variety. But again, we like to see these for a couple of years. So I think the jury is still out from the disease side.
I'll move on to our next variety, which is OK Corral.
Okay, OK Corral. So this is a new one out of OSU as well. OK Corral is a beardless variety, as you can probably see in that photo there. So it doesn't have the awns that we're used to for most of the varieties that we have in the Great Plains region here. Now, this one is a variety that the wheat breeder in Oklahoma, Brent Carver, is quite excited about with its release. He thinks he can get several acres in Oklahoma. But the main area of adaptation is kind of like from central Oklahoma going west into the Oklahoma Panhandle and really into the northwest part of Texas. So if it might fit in Kansas, it might be in the southernmost tiers of counties there. I think we need to see a little bit more yield data on Corral to see where it's going to fit. But some of the things that he was mentioning that was probably the reasons why he's quite excited with this one. It can be a very good forage producing wheat. So it can be used in a dual purpose. It bounces back quite well from that grazing stress. It's beardless, so it can be used as a hay bale or things along these lines. And it has a very good yield and a very good quality as well, right? So not only the yield, but the quality on these ones is supposed to be quite good. With high perinograph stability, for example. Tolerant to hash and fly, pretty good on acid soils as well. I believe, Eric, the disease complex on this one is quite good as well. But one drawback here would be the test weight. So many times these awnless varieties, they have a lower test weight, and that's the case for a Corral as well. Usually a couple of pounds per bushel lower than some of the others. And based on some of the comments from Brett there, the further away you are from that region of adaptation, northwest Oklahoma western Oklahoma into the northwest Texas there, the further it's going to lose its test weight. So I guess we're still looking to see how it's going to do it here in Kansas. Eric, do you have much information on the disease package of this one?
Well, our information from our own observations is pretty limited on OK Corral just because of it is so new. But the information we do have from Oklahoma State is that it sounds like they like its overall disease package, as Omalo was mentioning. They're describing it as resistant to both stripe rust and leaf rust, and also intermediate to moderately resistant to a lot of the leaf spotting diseases. And remember, for some of the leaf spotting diseases like tan spot or that septoria complex of diseases, it seems like the Oklahoma varieties have been a little more weak on those diseases for the last generation of varieties. So I think Brett Carver, the breeder there, has been working hard trying to improve that. And it looks like OK Corral, he feels like he's maybe got both the stripe rust, leaf rust, and the package on some of the leaf spotting diseases as well.
Next variety is Smith's Gold.
Okay, so we have Smith's Gold here, and I believe our next one, that would be Gallagher. We're going to kind of talk to them as a bundle here, at least in the agronomic side. And the reason for that is that Smith's Gold is really coming down as a replacement for Gallagher. So Gallagher has been around for a few years already, and it has gained several acres in South Central Kansas. And there are reasons for that, right? A very decent behavior on acid soils, very good acid soil tolerance, so hash and fly tolerance as well, decent drought tolerance, good yield potential, kind of like an medium early type of maturity there. And Smith's Gold brings some of those things to the table as well, right? It's good on acid soils, hash and fly as well. Now it has green bug resistance as well on top of that hash and fly. It's going to be a little bit earlier in heading than what we have in Gallagher, but a little bit later in first hollow stem, right? So whenever it's getting out of the winter dormancy, it gives you a few extra days to graze in the spring there as compared to Gallagher. Yield performance in Kansas, I mean, it seems like in Oklahoma they have been on pair, Smith's Gold and Gallagher. They have been kind of like about the same yield level there. Here in the south central part of the state, it seems like we still see a small advantage there to Gallagher. So we still see maybe Gallagher out yielding the Smith's Gold there in probably a bushel or two per acre. So I think we need to see how that's going to do here in Kansas. What about disease on these two, Kelsey? Whenever we talk about Smith's Gold and Gallagher, how are they faring as far as disease goes?
Sure, I think these two have comparable disease packages in that they're both, I think, pretty promising for stripe rust, stem rust, leaf rust, and then powdery mildew. So those are some of the key things you might want to think about, that would require a fungicide application. Now, Smith's Gold in particular is susceptible to Fusarium head blight, so that's a key watch out. Also to barley yellow dwarf, so you may get some dings from barley yellow dwarf in the field. And I think that that's really similar to what we see in Gallagher. Now, another key watch out for Smith's Gold is it is susceptible to tan spot. So just watching that, if that develops on the lower leaves, this might benefit from a fungicide application. But I think those are the key packages. It's still holding up pretty well to stripe rust. So that to us is impressive here.
Here's a quick look at the Gallagher variety in our plot. Any other comments on Gallagher?
It does look like it's holding its leaves a little bit better from the photo, at least, than what we had in the past photo, but that's just a comment that I'm seeing right now. So.
Okay. Our next variety is WB 4699.
Okay, so we're getting into the West bred varieties, and very briefly we can describe their numbering system here. So the first number there, number 4, it's always going to be a 4 for us here, because that tells us it's a hard red winter wheat variety. Second number 6, gives us an idea of the maturity of that variety. So 1 being an early maturing variety and 9 being a late maturing variety. So 6 tells us that this variety is going to be in that medium late group of maturity. Third number 9, gives us the year of release. So that one was released in 2019. And the last number is just a random number generated for each specific variety. So 4699, this is more of like a central and eastern adapted variety, really perhaps I-35 and east type of adaptability. So Kingman County might be there on the western edge where this might be um, okay there, perhaps because of some issues with drought tolerance on this one. It might not be one of the best, and so it might not move west very well. Also, it has very good standability, but in some of the tests that we're doing within K-State here with acid soils, it tends to show up. I mean, it doesn't really do very well in acid soils, at least based on some data that we're getting out of the breeding program here in Manhattan. So that might be something to watch out, is the presence of those acid soils there. Any comments there, Eric, on 4699's disease package?
Well, just a few comments here. One of the key strengths on the disease side from 4699 is some moderate levels of resistance to Fusarium head blight, which historically has been quite rare. We may get a firsthand look at how well it holds up here, as Kelsey was saying, with a little more risk of that particular disease. The other thing to watch here would be the potential for susceptibility to stripe rust. Leaf rust looks like it's a little bit more on the moderately susceptible to susceptible side there. So this is one that, even though we've got some of the best or better genetic resistance to the Fusarium head blight or head scab, we may still need a fungicide to control some leaf diseases.
All right, our next variety is WB 4515.
So this variety is another one that has an area of adaptation more of like a southeast Kansas to eastern Oklahoma there. The main calling card on this one is quality. So by that I mean milling and baking quality, pretty good test weight on this variety. So sometimes if a grower can access some niche market where he will sell not only the grain but also the quality of that grain, this might be an option. Pretty decent straw strength, medium short type of variety, kind of like a workhorse for the most part, but pretty large seeds, so you need to adjust the population for that. But I believe that this variety might be better suited out east. I mean, again, Kingman County might be on the western edge there of adaptation for a variety like this. What about the disease package on this one, Kelsey?
Yeah, my watch out east would be just quite susceptible to Fusarium head blight. So that's just a big consideration. So if you're, going to go for quality and for yield, that's definitely something to watch for, especially if planted after corn. But other than that, it has a pretty strong disease package. I think, intermediate to stripe rust. So I think we might conflict a little bit with west spread there. Maybe that's has something to do with the populations here in Kansas. But we're seeing it be a little more susceptible than maybe west spread says, but overall a decent disease package.
Okay, our next variety is WB 4269.
So this variety has been yielding quite well in South Central Kansas. It's one that has shown for the last 3 years really that we were able to take a look at it, a pretty strong performance. So for South Central Kansas, it is one that you might keep on the short list there. Pretty good straw strength on this one as well. You need to keep in mind though that this will be certified seed only, so that means that you will have to buy seed every year for 4269. And part of that is because West believes on the head scab tolerance of these varieties, so for those acres after corn. And Eric, what are we seeing in our own ratings there for head scab on 4269 and no other general comments for our disease package?
Yeah, 4269 has been interesting. I think it is another one of the west spread varieties, like Romulo mentioned, that does bring some strength to the table on the Fusarium head blight or head scab. So that's an important step. I think we've, over the years, have seen it hang in there reasonably well to stripe rust, leaf rust. However, we maybe have seen a little bit more weakness there in some of our recent work with the USDA, where they've been really tightening the screws down on the rust for a variety of evaluation purposes. So let's keep an eye on this one. I like the maturity for this area of the state. I think sometimes those early maturing varieties really have a chance to beat the heat before things get too dry and hot to finish that grain fill up.
Our next variety is WB4303.
Yeah, so this one is another earlier variety. So as Eric mentioned, that maturity on 4269 and this one, they would be kind of compatible there on that early to medium early maturity side. 4303 has an excellent straw strength, so it can handle very high yielding conditions. Differently from 4269, this one, it perhaps is going to end up with less peelers but huge heads, whereas 4269 is going to produce a very large number of peelers with smaller heads. So in the end, they just get to high yields on a different way, right? This one coming more from larger heads. It's another one that also has some pretty large seeds, so we need to watch out there with our seeding rate. If we're planting in pounds per acre, might need to adjust there, otherwise we have fewer seeds in a pound, and so because they're large seeds, we might end up with a thin stands on 4303. Again, very good yielding conditions here, very good yield potential, really good on acid soils as well, very good milling and baking characteristic. But as an intensively managed wheat, we might have to be budgeting fungicide application for this one, right, Kelsey?
Yeah, I think so. So I think to maximize that yield potential, this would probably benefit from a fungicide, especially in these wetter, more disease-conducive years. It's fairly susceptible to fusarium head blight, powdery mildew, tan spot, kind of down the list, stripe rust. So yeah, to get the most out of this variety, I think it's a bit more sensitive than others. It might need a fungicide application.
All right, thank you. Now we have LCS Fusion AX.
So before talking about the variety Fusion itself, let's just talk a little bit about the AX part of it, and that means that this is a coaxium variety. So coaxium is a new technology for herbicide resistance, and it's resistant to the aggressor herbicide, which is a ACCase inhibitor type of herbicide for grassy weed control. So I believe Kelly mentioned some cheat problems and things along these lines. So this would be a technology that could help in those situations where grassy weeds are a concern. We're seeing several varieties being released out of with this technology now, most of them either from Lima Grain, like this one, or from Colorado State University. This is a technology that is to be used in rotation with other technologies such as the Clearfield technology, right? Which is a tolerance to a different herbicide. So we cannot mix the herbicides there, otherwise we're going to kill the variety that's not tolerant to that specific herbicide. So with that said, LCS Fusion AX, that's probably a variety that is better adapted to Western environments. It has bird and hatcher in the background. So really probably not a very good fit there for South Central Kansas. Again, we're just taking a first look at these varieties this year, but some of the varieties that seem to have maybe a better adaptability to their region might be LCS Atomic AX or LCS Helix AX. So again, we're more discussing the technology here more than anything else. As we need more yield data, we need to take a closer look at these varieties with at least another year or two of data so we can actually position them in the region.
So Callie, as we advance to the next slide, I think you can go ahead and advance. I think part of that adaptation that LCS Fusion is really going to struggle with is some of its stripe rust, leaf rust reaction is very weak. So it may really struggle on the disease side there in South Central Kansas, where Helix or Atomic might be better options.
Yeah, there's quite a bit on there in that little plot, so that was definitely true. The LCS Chrome is its next variety.
Yeah, so LCS Chrome here up next. So Chrome has been around for a few years now. A few of the agronomic things that I like about Chrome is its extendability, its drought tolerance, its low pH tolerance as well. So some of the things that actually make it quite widely adapted. Now, one thing that I tend to think can be a concern in South Central Kansas is its maturity. So it is on the late side of maturity, the medium late, too late heading out there. And that means that many times you can get caught on the heat during grain filling period. And that will be my biggest concern as far as agronomics go here in Chrome. What about disease here, Eric? What are we seeing in Chrome?
Yeah, Chrome is an interesting variety. We've had a chance to look at its overall disease package in recent years, and it's been fairly strong for a number of years. It seems like its leaf rust, stripe rust has been hanging in there. However, as Kelsey mentioned in some of her opening comments, this is one where we've seen some potential for the current population of stripe rust showing some more susceptible reactions or more aggressiveness here on Chrome than we've seen historically. So I think we're going to want to keep an eye on that in Chrome, make sure we don't get any surprises as we get into the next couple seasons here. Maybe a few places where my readings disagree with what Lima Grain has been seeing. I feel like this is maybe a little more vulnerable to early yellow dwarf and fusarium head blight than what Lima Grain feels like. So you can take that with a grain of salt, but it's not uncommon to see bright yellow leaves from barley yellow dwarf in some of these LCS Chrome plots.
All right, the next one we have is SY Monument.
Yeah, so SY Monument, quite widely adapted variety here throughout the state. Really, it has gained several acres in recent years. And so actually for the last 2 years, it's been the most widely planted wheat around the state. So Monument is going to be a medium late maturing wheat. So again, we talked about Chrome being a medium late to late one. Monument is going to be a few days earlier than what we have in Chrome, but still falling into that medium late maturity category. Very high fielding ability here in SY Monument, and this allows growers sometimes to plant slightly later as well. That makes it a good variety for those cropping systems where growers are going after soybeans and planting late. A decent level of drought tolerance allows Monument to move west quite well, and also pretty good acid soil tolerance here in Monument. So one that for the medium late maturity, I would probably still have it on my short list. Of course, being in South Central Kansas, I would not put all my eggs in one basket, right? I wouldn't put all my fields to SY Monument here. But again, within that late maturity, medium late maturity group, this one that might be on the short list. Pretty good performance overall. What about its disease package here, Kelsey?
Yeah, I think Monument has a great disease package. I think similar to what Eric just said for Chrome, it has a good package for leaf, stem, and stripe rust, and for some of the leaf spotting diseases. It's one of those like we're seeing in Chrome, though, that we're seeing more stripe rust than we have in past seasons. So it's one we're watching for some of those race shifts. One watch out would be, again, fusarium head blight. So it's weaker on fusarium head blight than some other varieties that are in this lineup, but the trade-off is you get some other disease resistance. So I think it's one to scout for, and overall it's a pretty good option.
All right, our next one is Paradise.
So Paradise variety that's been licensed to Polanski seed. It has this type of, like, you can actually see, I mean, kind of like more of a red chaff, like a look that resembles quite a bit that would be 44, 58 from a few years back. Paradise, as far as yield record in Central Kansas goes, we have seen Paradise win plots, and we've seen it be towards the bottom as well. So that would be, I believe the situations where it was towards the bottom was probably because of head scab. So it is quite susceptible there to fusarium head scab. And so that's one thing to keep in mind. Probably wouldn't go with this one in my acres following corn. Pretty good end use quality. So I think really we need maybe some more time to take a look at these ones, see how it's going to yield this year, and see how it compares to the other varieties there. Eric, what have you seen as far as disease goes in Paradise?
Yeah, Paradise, as you mentioned, is quite vulnerable to fusarium head blight or head scab. And in fact, maybe that head that's kind of turning tan colored or bronze a little bit early that Callie is showing there on the left-hand side may well be Fusarium head blight. It's a little hard to tell from this picture. The other vulnerability to watch out for would be moderately susceptible to leaf rust, but it's been holding up pretty good to stripe rust, so that can be a plus in some of these years where we get into trouble with stripe rust very early in the growing season.
Okay. Next up, we have Western Star.
So KS Western Star here, it's a new release out of K-State Haze breeding program. It's one that we're particularly quite excited with as a hard red being released out of Haze. It has a very, very good drought tolerance because it has a bird on the background, and so that brings a pretty good drought tolerance there to this variety. Very good with mite tolerance as well, so against that wheat streak mosaic. Decent standability on this one as well. And this is a variety that, despite being released by the Western breeding program, it does have soil-borne mosaic virus, which might allow it to move quite well into central Kansas. So I think we kind of still need to see what's going to be as far as its performance in central Kansas, but actually quite confident that it might perform pretty well in central Kansas as well. Medium height, medium maturity variety there, very good drought tolerance. What do we have as far as disease ratings go here for Western Star, Kelsey?
Yeah, I think you nailed some of the key points there, Homo. Really, really nice to see that wheat curl mite resistance and that soil-borne mosaic resistance. And then the leaf rust, stem rust, and stripe rust resistance is also looking fairly good for Western Star. So I think overall, just a good package, but we're going to have to see it a little bit more, but it's holding up pretty well.
All right, our next one is Larry.
So Larry is a release out of the K-State breeding program in Manhattan from a few years back now. Larry was released with an area of adaptation mind of like kind of south central Kansas going into southwest Kansas, but not far southwest Kansas. So it has a decent drought tolerance that allows it to move west well, although it's not really a drought tolerance that we typically have in the Colorado varieties or western Kansas varieties. So for south central Kansas, I think Larry is actually a very good option there. It has again very good drought tolerance, excellent standability there on Larry as well. It's more on that medium maturity. It's going to have a pretty high tillering ability here as well, medium height as well. So typically a little bit taller and a little bit later maturing than what we're used to seeing come out of the Manhattan breeding program. But for that south central part of the state, is actually a very good variety. Now, if you look at the K-State yield records, sometimes it's not going to show. And I believe, Eric, that perhaps that has to do with its disease package in many years there.
Yeah, I think Larry has maybe been a little inconsistent in some years and maybe not lived up to what we saw in its latter years of its development, as it was a elite breeding line at that time, just before its release. So probably the key vulnerability has been leaf rust susceptibility, has probably dinged Larry in a few years here. As it gets late in the growing season, it's not unusual for us to see a little flush of leaf rust, and that can hit Larry pretty hard. Also quite vulnerable to Fusarium head blight or head scab, and that's been creeping into parts of central Kansas also, as we've seen more and more corn acreage take some area in central Kansas as well. Remember that Fusarium fungus also causes a stalk rot, e-rot in corn, and that corn residue is a primary source of where that Fusarium fungus survives. So Larry has maybe struggled a little bit more than we'd like because of some of those disease vulnerabilities.
All right, our next one is Zenda.
So Zenda is another release that from about 3 years back or so, together with Larry. But Zenda was released more of a central and eastern Kansas type of adaptation in mind. If probably, well, for sure growers are familiar with the variety Everest, and Zenda is really a replacement for Everest. So it has actually 50% of Everest on its background there. So it brings to the table several good things that Everest had and that made Everest quite successful over the years. Those including a very good acid soil tolerance, medium early maturity. Everest was an early one, Zenda is more of medium early. It is medium short. Everest was more of a short one. This one's a little bit taller than Everest, but excellent straw strength. So it doesn't really, it actually has an excellent standability there. So one that I think for this part of the world, Kingman County, where Zenda is located, right, this would be an obvious choice there. And especially for those acres after corn, right, Kelsey?
Yeah, totally. I think Zenda is a kind of a shining star when it comes to Fusarium head blight. It's some of the best available in the portfolio here for FHB. So that's a big positive. And then across the board for a lot of the important diseases in this area, tan spot, stripe rust, leaf rust. And I think, you know, this one's starting to slip a little bit on stripe rust. So we've seen a little more than we had historically in Zenda. But I think overall, when at least a disease person thinks about a good disease package, Zenda would be right at the top. One red flag would be wheat streak mosaic. So that, especially out west, that's a little bit of a barrier, but just a strong package overall.
Canmark.
So Canmark has been around now for a number of years. It's more of a medium maturity variety, short as well, as you can see there in the picture. Typically has this upper type of open type of canopy, upper leaves there, very straight leaves that gives it kind of like a thin look, as you can see there. You can kind of row it in this photo compared to some of the other varieties. Now that doesn't necessarily reflect in yield, right? It's just the type of the canopy architecture that we have. Yield-wise, it has been actually quite stable as far as yield goes, and that's one of its characteristics, like yield stability there for Canmark. But it does have a pretty decent straw strength that allows you to push some yields on it if you really go a little bit higher on the fertility. For example, it can withstand some higher levels of fertility there. But as far for this region, perhaps one concern that I would have with Canmark here, it would be on the acid soil tolerance side of things. Canmark, unlike Zenda or Larry, for example, doesn't necessarily bring that good acid soil tolerance to the table. So that'll be one concern that I would have in this region here. Eric, what about disease package in Canmark?
Yeah, Canmark maybe has a few vulnerabilities we'd want to keep on our radar if we were going to look at growing Canmark. Fusarium head blight, like we've mentioned with Larry and a few other varieties, can really come after Canmark pretty hard. Stripe rust also, you know, it's kind of interesting from a rust disease perspective in that this is one of the varieties that has come out of a long-term effort of the Manhattan breeding program to breed for more stable type of resistance to the rust diseases. They feel like they've got that package in terms of leaf rust here in Canmark, but not quite been enough for the stripe rust. So it seems like we've seen stripe rust, particularly in young plants, take a little too much leaf area to really call it resistant. So it kind of ends up with an intermediate to moderately susceptible reaction at the grain filling stages that are so critical for our yield and productivity of a variety. So maybe one that's better adapted a little bit further west, maybe where growers could take advantage of that strong straw strength in a higher management type of situation under irrigation.
Okay, and Jagger?
Eric, I'll probably rely on you for that one. I haven't seen much of Jagger.
Yeah, so Jagger is kind of one of the granddaddy type of wheat varieties that was released in the 90s and is at one time was in the background pedigree of some 60-70% of the wheat varieties that we grow here in the state. At its peak, Jagger held some 40 or 50% of the wheat acres, not only here in Kansas, but also in Oklahoma, Nebraska, and well down into Texas. I've heard of Jagger wheat being grown around the world. So it really is a very influential wheat variety. Probably the things that have really allowed Jagger to be successful was very early maturing, good acid soil tolerance, At its time, it was a whole new plateau of yield, and I think that's why a lot of growers stayed with it for a long time. It seems like leaf rust, very early in its development, came after Jagger early and often. Around 2010, stripe rust got its number as well. But still today, it's interesting to see Jagger in plots like this, and it still hangs in there and is pretty competitive, giving even some of our recent releases a run for its money.
All right, our last one is Turkey Red.
Want to go for that one again, Eric?
Sure. Turkey Red's kind of another interesting one. This one goes back at least 150 years or so, when the German Mennonites that were at the time living in Russia moved into the United States and brought this, which was already a wheat variety at that time. So this is one of the original type of wheat varieties that was selected out of more of a land race type of concept here, which was it still tends to segregate or is variable for a lot of different diseases, a lot of different characteristics, all sorts of different heights, and disease reactions can be seen in Turkey Red. And it's not well noted for its straw strength. As you can see in this plot, it looks like it's leaning pretty hard and it's probably already lodged once. It'll probably honestly lodge 3 more times before it goes down and stays flat. That will probably have to be picked up with a special harvest operation there.
All right. Thank you guys very much for going over that with us. Again, just wanted to thank Conradi Seed. They have been taking care of the plot and they do a fabulous job with it. And Steve is an amazing person to be in charge of this. So he has offered for anybody to feel free to drive out and look through the plot. The address is below, and it is closer to the west side of the driveway, or the east side of the driveway, and you can see the signs in the driveway. So there's the address for the plots, and just wanted to thank you, Romulo, Eric, Kelsey. Thank you for going over all this and just giving us your time to go through these, as you guys are specialists in this area and are very important to our local producers out here. So